In this lecture, I'd like to start off by trying to establish some criteria for ascertaining a given religion's worldview. Now, you might be asking, what's a worldview? A worldview is one's general philosophy or outlook. Worldviews aren't things that you'll only find in religions. Every individual has some kind of worldview, regardless of whether he or she is religious. You have some kind of worldview as well. You may not be able to articulate what that is exactly. In fact, most people are barely conscious of what kind of metaphysical, epistemological, or ethical system that they adhere to. And yet, and this is what's interesting, they'll have no difficulty telling you whether something is real, whether some proposition is credible or true, whether some action is good or bad, right or wrong, and so on. Well, anyway, it's worth thinking about why people believe what they do. I suspect that most people believe what they do because they're simply following what others around them happen to believe. Of course, not everyone around them believes the same thing, and that's why, if many people's worldviews were subjected to a critical analysis, they would turn out to be embarrassingly inconsistent or otherwise poorly conceived. Perhaps this is one reason that people find religion helpful. Rather than having to come up with their own beliefs whole cloth, from scratch, and rather than having to rely entirely on their individual judgments, people can listen to the opinions of others who have spent a whole lifetime thinking about these matters and have attempted to construct a coherent and well-conceived worldview. Okay, now I've defined worldview in terms of three things: metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. If those terms sound a little bit unfamiliar to you, don't worry, because they are unfamiliar to most people. But hopefully by the time you finish this class, you'll have a better grasp of what they mean. These are the three main categories of philosophy. Supposedly you can talk about any philosophical topic under one of these three headings. So let's look at each of these in a bit more detail. Okay, so first of all, metaphysics. What is metaphysics? It's your theory about the nature of reality. What is reality? Are we in just a dream or something? Is there some kind of objective external world out there that exists independent of our subjective and personal experiences? What's it made of? Is it matter in motion, just particles vibrating through space? Or is there something more? Is there like consciousness? Is there spirit? Are there angels? Is there a God? Is there such a thing as a human person, an identity of some sort? How do you have an identity? Are there souls? Do you have a soul? Do you have a mind? Not just a brain, but do you have a mind? Do you have consciousness? Is that a real thing, or are we all just like automatons who are doing what the chemicals are telling us to do? Do human beings have a certain dignity or value over against, say, animals or plants or rocks? So these are the types of questions that you would ask within the realm of metaphysics. And as I said, everybody has some kind of beliefs about these things, or at least you operate that way. Maybe you are agnostic about a lot of things, but the way you live your life betrays the fact that you have certain beliefs about things. Okay, and then what about epistemology? This is your theory of knowledge. Okay, how do we know things? If the world is composed of nothing but matter, or if it's composed of spirit as well, or something else, how do we know that? Do you know it through the use of your senses? Do you know it through rational thought and arguments? Do you know it through an intuition of sorts? Something you may not be able to articulate necessarily, but you intuit this about the world. Is it known to you through revelation? Does God reveal something to us? Maybe in the scriptures or something like that. So there are lots of theories of knowledge, theories about how we know things about the world and about our experience. All right, and then we have ethics, which is basically your theory of values. Why do we regard some things as good? Why do we think that some music is good and some music is bad? Is it all just subjective, or are there objective criteria for determining that? How do you know whether something or someone is beautiful or ugly? How do you know whether something is right or wrong, good or evil? These are all ethical questions, all right? So that's how we sort of break things down in terms of worldview. We'll be looking at how each religion that we study assesses things metaphysically, epistemologically, and ethically. Okay, so let's get started. We have, first of all, the absolute. This is something that you'll find in almost all religions, questions about what is the absolute, what is the best, the most important thing in the world. Now, the term absolute has a lot of, or at least 3 different definitions, as you can see here in this excerpt from the dictionary. I want you to focus on the one that's highlighted, though. So the absolute, when I talk about the absolute, I'm talking about the perfect, the complete, the entire, something that's possessed as a quality in the highest degree, or possessing the essential characteristics of the attribute named in the highest degree, as absolute purity, absolute liberty, or you could say absolute goodness, or absolute deity, whatever it would be, that is absolute in your universe. That is the most important thing. You might say that's what the religion is most focused on. Okay, now for a lot of religions, that absolute is going to be God. But not all religions endorse the belief in a God. Buddhism, for example, in a lot of its forms, doesn't advocate the belief in God. Or at least it says that if there are gods, they are of no value to you. Okay, so now this would be mostly a metaphysical question. Unless we ask, how do we know this? How do we know what the absolute is? Then it becomes more of an epistemological question. Another thing that we'll want to look at is how the religion regards the world or the universe or nature. Should it be viewed in a certain way? Should it be valued, protected, denigrated, etc.? And then again, we can ask the epistemological question, how do we know this, right? So the metaphysical question, should it be viewed in a certain way? Valued? I guess that would also be kind of an ethical question. So I guess you could say this issue impinges on all 3 of those things: metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Next thing we want to look at is how does the religion regard human beings? For example, it might attempt to answer the question about what is our metaphysical makeup? What is our essence? And then, how do we know this? Are we special? How do we know this? So those are all metaphysical and epistemological questions, but then we could ask the ethical question, how does who or what we are impact how we treat others? If we are something of special dignity, for example, say if we're created in God's image, then that would affect the way we relate to one another. But if we're all just sort of bags of biochemical material, then that could potentially affect the way we treat other people as well. Okay, and then we want to look at the problem. This is something that you find in most religions, if not all of them. The religion tries to identify some kind of problem for humans. What's gone wrong? Why is everything so messed up? Why do people behave so badly? Why is there suffering? Why are all these problems all around us constantly? And the next question is going to be, how do we solve those problems, or how do we address that? But first of all, the problem. So up in this top left corner, you have the story of Adam and Eve, and this is the explanation according to both Judaism and Christianity as to how evil entered the world. More so Christianity than Judaism, but certainly in Christianity, and I guess Islam as well, would see Adam and Eve as being the first sinners, the first ones to transgress God's law and to cause sin to enter into the world, at least into the human world. So the story of Adam and Eve, it's told in Genesis chapters 2 through 3. And you have the serpent who tempts Eve to eat the fruit from the tree that God had forbidden to eat from. And then she gives it to her husband, and the 2 of them are cast out of the garden. And the effects of that sin are then passed on to their descendants. And so the whole race of human beings has been corrupted by sin and affected adversely by sin. And then over on the right, you have the Buddha saying the root of suffering is attachment. Okay, so this suffering is what he identified as the problem. It's not sin per se, it's just suffering. And then the way to get around that is to, first of all, to identify the root, but then secondly, to detach yourself from those things. Anyway, so let's go to the next page, which has to do with solutions. So I just mentioned the one for Buddhism. The solution, according to Christianity, down at the bottom left, we talked about Adam and Eve. So sin has become a problem and the effects of sin. such as, a corrupt human nature where we just continue to sin and fall away from God, but then also the physical effects of suffering and death. Well, a solution to these things has been offered to us by God when he sent his son to die in our place. Okay, so he died, he took on all of our suffering, all of our sin, so that by believing in him, we can escape the penalty, the ultimate penalty for our sin, which I guess would be death and hell. It doesn't necessarily get you out of the present circumstances of suffering, but it does ultimately deliver us from those worse things in the afterlife. Okay, and then here on the top left, you've got someone meditating, and this is the solution according to Buddhism, Hinduism, lots of different religions. You want to clear your mind, or you want to start thinking the right thoughts. Okay, and that's going to bring you deliverance ultimately, because you'll be able to experience nirvana. You'll be able to identify all the problems in your life and figure out that, oh, look, I'm attached to all these things, and that's the reason I'm suffering so much. And in the center, you've got the symbol for one of the basic principles of Taoism, which is a Chinese religion, philosophy. And that's the idea that everything needs to be kept in balance. Okay, that's the solution according to Taoism. And then on the top right, you've got a Jewish man studying the Torah, studying the scriptures. And he's got a phylactery on his head. Those are the little box of scripture texts. So he's studying scripture, and that's going to bring him salvation. So again, religions generally try to identify a problem for humans, and then also to offer some kind of solution or remedy for that problem. Religions also tend to have a social or communal dimension. They may offer weekly gatherings and holiday celebrations. They may encourage prayer for or with other members of the religion. They may emphasize abstract concepts of union with other members of the religion. They may speak of a brotherhood of believers, for example, a church universal, a body of Christ, an ummah. If the religion is closely tied to a nation or ethnic group, then the religion may emphasize certain nationalistic or ethnic ideas, and so on. Religions will also tend to have certain ethical or behavioral requirements or recommendations. In Judaism, for example, many will avoid certain foods like pork or shellfish. For many years in Roman Catholicism, people were forbidden to eat meat on Fridays during Lent. And because of that, even here in America, which is a majority Protestant nation, public schools had to offer students fish on Fridays. Celibacy has also been encouraged as a great expression of devotion within certain traditions of Christianity, as well as Buddhism, other religions too. Religions will also promote certain kinds of practices which perhaps stand out, such as abstinence from sex before marriage, abstinence from alcohol and drugs, care for the poor, humility, charity, forgiveness, and so on. Religions also tend to offer some kind of interpretation of history, and in so doing, they'll attempt to answer certain questions, such as whether historical events have any special meaning, or did history have an important beginning? Where are we now in the grand scheme of things? And is it going somewhere? So you can see here on the top right, this is from a Christian perspective. Some of it too would be from a Jewish perspective, but you see the beginning, creation with Adam, and then you get the flood of Noah, the story of Abraham, Moses, David, Daniel, and then Christ comes at about the turn of the millennium. And then you have, the church from all this time. And then you got Columbus and American Revolution, so I think this is just random things. These aren't necessarily religious events, but, just to show you where we are in history. So now here's 2000 and beyond. And what's going to happen next? Well, we don't know necessarily everything, but Jesus will return at some point and restore his kingdom. There will be a resurrection of the dead, a final judgment, and then the saints will reign with Christ forever and ever. Well, that, you might say, is a linear type of understanding of history. In other religions, history is seen as a more cyclical thing. So this wheel at the bottom represents history according to Hinduism, because every so often things repeat. And so there will be these long ages when things will happen, and then things will get destroyed and everything will start over again, and then things will get destroyed again and things will start over again. All right, religions also have something to say about life after death. Some religions teach that there will be life after death. Others teach that they don't really know whether there's life after death, for example, Buddhism. Some teach that there will be punishments for the wicked, rewards for the righteous. Others teach that everyone will just go to a happy place. And so lots of different views. The Egyptians had a very distinctive view, as we'll talk about. Religions will also encourage certain types of relationships with other religions or worldviews. For example, some religions will celebrate other religions, like the Baha'i faith, for example. They're happy that you're religious. It doesn't matter what religion you're a part of. As long as you're religious, that's a good thing. Other religions will encourage a cooperation between religions, but they don't necessarily approve of everything in the other religions. So, for example, in the ecumenical movement within Christianity, you've got Christians working with Buddhists and Muslims to promote some kind of social agenda, to fight against poverty, inequality, racism, abortion, and so on. And then another attitude, notice these are becoming less and less celebratory as we go down. Another attitude would be to tolerate, but not necessarily to endorse or even work with people of other religions, but just to tolerate them. So, you have your religion, I have my religion, and we'll just coexist, but not necessarily like each other or do anything together. And then other religions will tend to be more hostile and adversarial toward people of other faiths. And then going further, some would even encourage violence toward members of other faiths. And then still there's another category that's completely different from all these, where people are just indifferent. They don't care what other people believe or practice. They're apathetic or indifferent about it. Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about is, why would we want to study religion? Many people, especially here in America, tend to approach education from a purely pragmatic standpoint. This shouldn't be too surprising. America is the birthplace of philosophical pragmatism, after all. This pragmatic approach usually translates into a kind of crass materialism. People will assume that if a certain college degree, or even a certain course that's being offered in college, isn't going to help them land a high-paying job, then it's just not worth doing. Well, I admit that if your top priority in going to school is to make lots of money, and if other issues just aren't very important to you, then it's probably true that the study of religion is not for you. There are certainly better things to study if you want to make money, but if you're trying to be pragmatic about your education, well, that's another issue entirely. Pragmatism is about attaining your goals. Your biggest goal in life might not be to make a lot of money or to become famous or something like that. Maybe it's to grow in your walk with God, or to become enlightened, or to figure out the meaning of life, or to achieve nirvana, or perhaps it's to fulfill a certain calling, or to perform certain responsibilities. Religions have a lot to say about how to achieve those kinds of goals. The book of Proverbs in the Bible, for example, gives lots of advice about worldly wisdom, how to raise your children, how to plan for the future, how to avoid poverty, and so on. Hinduism has its 4 noble pursuits in life, one of which is the pursuit of worldly success, so it has a lot to say about that topic. Buddhism has a lot to say about how to avoid suffering in life. Jesus had a lot to say about how to avoid conflict, and so on. So again, depending on your goals in life, the study of religion may actually seem like a pragmatically worthwhile pursuit. But it's probably true that most people who study religion or who practice religion aren't thinking simply about whether it's practical or not. They see it as an inherently valuable study or an inherently valuable pursuit in life. I mean, what could be more important than reflecting on some of the great religious questions, such as, is there a God? Is there an afterlife? Is there good and evil? How do we know what good and evil is? What is right and wrong? Do human beings have some kind of special dignity above the animals, above crickets, above the trees? These are very important questions. The next thing that the study of religion can help you to do is to become more philosophically reflective. I think we need to do away with this notion that religious people are just a bunch of obtuse, stick-in-the-mud type of people that don't think. They just believe things. They trust their religious leaders. They trust the Bible with some kind of blind faith and all that. I find that religious people tend to be much more philosophical. They tend to think more and become more conscious about their actions and their beliefs. They tend to be more critically minded and self-aware. Well, those are the kinds of things that I want to try to encourage in this class in any case. Okay, next, the study of religion will help you to understand history better. If you look here at the top left, I think that's George Whitefield perhaps, or Jonathan Edwards, one of the two. And he's preaching to a crowd of people who are gathered. This was during the Great Awakening here in America, when a lot of people reignited their Christian faith and became much more committed to Christianity, largely on account of these preachers such as George Whitefield. And then here in the middle, there is the depiction of a famous ritual within Egyptian religion, known as the opening of the mouth ceremony. So here's the sarcophagus being brought out, and they open up the sarcophagus and the mouth of the mummy, and they stick some things in it, and they close it back up and put it back in. We'll talk about that when we get to Egyptian religion. Here is a ritual in the Middle Americas of ripping out the heart of someone. I think it's the Incas or the Aztecs, I forget which one. But anyway, this is a depiction of that. Over here on the bottom left is the Parthenon in Athens, Greece. The Parthenon was a very famous shrine dedicated to the great virgin Athena, the patron goddess of the city of Athens. So, lots of things happened in Athens, and much of it was understood within the framework of Greek religion, of course. The next benefit to studying religion, in my opinion, is that it can help you to avoid bigotry. Now, bigotry, a lot of people misunderstand what that word means these days, but it doesn't mean racism. It just means narrow-mindedness. The dictionary defines it as a stubborn and complete intolerance of any creed, belief, or opinion that differs from one's own. So it's a very narrow-minded perspective, and a lot of times when people are ignorant of other perspectives and they don't understand why people believe the things that they do, they tend to look down on those people and to think that they're just stupid or wrong or something. Well, that's a very bigoted perspective. So studying religion can help promote greater understanding and empathy between people about what they believe and why they do the things that they do. Studying religion can also help you in your personal religious quest. It can help you to become more informed about the various religions that exist, thus allowing you to make a more informed decision about which religion you would like to embrace or which ones you'd like to reject. Okay, and then the study of religion might also prompt you to experiment with a new religion, or to become more committed to the one that you're already a part of, to become more enlightened about the one that you're a part of, to study it more. Okay, and then lastly, I think that the study of religion is important because religion is just interesting. Learning about what other people believe is interesting to me. Maybe not to you, but to me it is. Learning about the available options for what you can or can't believe, that's interesting to me too. I want to know, I want to have those options on the table so I know how to make good decisions about what I believe. And then I would say that studying religion will make you a more interesting person too, because it will make you less one-dimensional. Have you ever met someone who all they can talk about is pop culture or cars or sports? Well, those types of people, to my mind anyway, are not very interesting. They can only talk about those few things. Well, religion is another thing that you could talk about, and depending on how far you go with it, it can open up all sorts of doors for conversations, for new directions in life that you might want to pursue. It's just a very interesting study, in my opinion. So those are some things that I'd like you to think about on the question of why it might be worthwhile to study religion. And then going back to the earlier part of the lecture, some things that you can look for in order to ascertain the worldview of a given religion. All right, thanks for listening.